the question that the consumer has in their mind as they walk up to the shelf is why? Why am I buying this? Why am I buying it now? Why this particular product? Why would I spend this much on this product? And that's the friction. That's what actually creates the resistance to make a decision. So for the consumer, you really just want to have an answer ready for them.
Welcome to another episode of Fresh Take with IDDBA. I'm your host, Kat Shanahan, and today we're bringing you another What's in Store episode. Joining us is Mike Sadler from Forever Cheese, a specialty food veteran whose career spans everything from New York's elite coffee scene to Michelin-star kitchens like 11 Madison Park. With decades in the industry, Mike is a master at helping retailers break out of commodity price wars by turning high-quality specialty items into everyday consumer habits. Today, he's giving us insights and highlights of his 2026 What's in Store live session, Premium for the People, Top Shelf on Every Shelf, to reveal how grocery counters of all sizes can win on quality. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time. I heard great things about your session at the show this year and What's in Store Live, so we're excited to bring that information to our listeners as well.
Amazing.
Now, you've sold specialty products to an unbelievable range of clients, from tech campuses like Google to Michelin-star restaurants, and now across national retail counters. What is the common thread when convincing anyone to pay top shelf quality?
Yeah, I would say the common thread is that when we're talking about retail products, when we're talking about any sort of products that people are buying, one of the first things that everybody looks at is the price tag. And so we're always going to be up against the challenge of justifying that price tag. And, when you're talking about commodity products or products, everyday products, there will be back and forth that happens between companies trying to compete for better pricing. When we're talking about premium products, we don't necessarily have the luxury of going lower on price. So then the question is, how do we actually get people to buy those products? And the way that we do that is we have to justify that value. And so I would say, be it, selling specialty coffee, which I did for many years, selling to the different customers that you were mentioning, be that, a corporate campus, be that one of the nicer restaurants in New York City, and now dealing with national retailers, you're always going to be up against that price. So then the question is, what makes your product worthwhile? What makes it worth that price?
And when you're thinking about how you started in the specialty coffee scene and now you're doing specialty cheese, has there anything that the coffee industry figured out about habit building and storytelling, like you mentioned, that the deli case needs to learn from?
I think that's a great question. I think a lot of the lessons that have come, come to the forefront in specialty coffee are centered around the idea of inviting the customer in. So when I came up in specialty coffee, let's say the early 20 teens, New York really didn't have a huge specialty coffee scene. And for a lot of customers, I worked many different areas of those companies, including being behind the counter. And the customer walking in, frequently the reaction I would see is, I'm intimidated. I don't know what this is. And frankly, I'm not sure what to do here. And so creating an inviting environment was really something I think in the beginning, most shops were not even that interested in. I'll be totally honest. I think that there was almost my product is excellent, take it or leave it. And I understand that that's, to some degree, you do have to, say like, yes, this is a product of value. Here's the price on it. But to another degree, you have to be able to invite people in. And I think that has been a shift that I saw happen across the specialty coffee industry. And I think it's a shift that, retailers could learn from, because I think, especially when you talk about the specialty side of this business, vendors like ourselves, like Forever Cheese, We operate from we're the experts. We're operating from that place. The next step of that is then to say, if I'm the expert, how do I teach you? How do I welcome you in, as the consumer and make people more and more comfortable with paying that price because they have transparency, they have visibility to understand, oh, actually, I can justify this. And not only that, but there's quality behind it. It's something special. It's a treat. It's something they can show off to their friends. But again, you need to invite them in. They can't be afraid of it because especially when you are looking at that product at the counter, that moment of hesitation is when you lose the sale. So that's our challenge as specialty vendors to be able to make that decision easier for the customer.
And I think that the deli case and cheese specifically is a really good format or a really good place for that because you do get to build displays and things are colorful. Have there been any specific examples that you've seen out and about where you think that either a specialty cheese or deli counter looks particularly inviting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that we've really focused on really in the last few years that I've been with Forever Cheese is creating very vibrant displays. And that can be, making it more colorful, but it's also, being really particular and intentional about here's the font, here's the wording that I'm putting on the product. I'll give a very concrete example. We have a product called Woolly Woolly. This is a fresh sheep's milk cheese log. It's in the style of a goat's milk chev, but it's sheep's milk. The advantages of that product are that it's a little more accessible. Folks that might be a little afraid of goat's milk. Um, this cheese is much smoother. There's no what we would call sheepiness to it. It's a great product. The problem that we came up against is talking to retailers about it. They said, well, how do I actually sell this on the shelf? People
Hmm.
see this, in the case, and they say, well, that's just another Chev. And the reality is that's a very, I don't want to call it a saturated category, but there's a lot of options out there in the Chev category. So for a customer, they say, well, I don't know why I would buy this because it's just another, plain goat's milk log, when in fact it's actually a sheep's milk log. So we actually are in the process of totally changing and pivoting that packaging because before we had a picture of a sheep, but again, it wasn't reading to customers. So
Hmm.
now the new packaging, it will say very loudly sheep's milk cheese. And those are the areas where, yeah, you might say, well, that's the easy answer. That's the most obvious answer. But sometimes that's the answer to be able to invite the customer in, tell that story. So again, you need to be able to, you grab people's attention with the design, you grab their attention, in the way that the shelf is, that your product lands on the shelf. But you also need to do things as simple as saying, which milk is this?
Hmm. Yeah, you have to kind of meet them halfway.
That's right. That's right.
So, in your workshop title, it was top shelf on every shelf. And in your experience, when you see retailers that are trying to treat a premium specialty item with the same pricing and promotional strategy as commodity items, where do things typically go wrong?
That's a great question. So I think, again, we in the premium space, we can't compete against those products. We simply, the pricing apples to apples comparison is never going to work. So this really comes down to finding different areas to merchandise those products strategically. Another thing that we focus on a lot is merchandising by occasion versus actual attributes. So, your average product, you're going to focus on, well, to go back to my previous example, you're going to say focus on this is a sheep's milk cheese. This is from Spain. And then you're going to put all the Spanish products together. But when you put all the Spanish products together, you're actually lumping together a number of very different types of items. So now when we move to merchandising by occasion, when we say, essentially, here's your everyday cheddar, Okay. You, the customer knows, great, this is very affordable. Then you move to say, your Cabot cheddar. Okay, this is brand name. I know what this is. Then you move to your Cabot cloth bound Jasper Hill cheddar. That's your destination item. That's your item that is elevated. And the customer needs to understand, in what situation am I buying each of these items? Because if you present that cloth bound cheddar next to a commodity or store brand cheddar and say that they're on the same level, you're really not doing justice to what goes into that cloth bound cheddar.
Hmm.
So what we need to do is really distinguish, and that is, pointing out, here's a situation that I'm going to buy this cheese, then you're going to, those premium products are going to lose out. So we really focus on finding ways to show, oh, actually, this is differentiated. This is, but at the same time, it's something that you would buy. The average consumer would buy this in this particular situation.
I like that you talk about merchandising in different areas. Maybe we need to expand and collaborate across the store a little bit more. Are there any examples or any other recommendations you have around those collaborations and how to drive increases in basket size without overwhelming the customer?
A great example of, a way that you can merchandise by occasion and also grow that basket size is by identifying, a country, right?
Mm.
So now we've identified we're going to focus on these special products from Spain. So at that point, you're pointing out, well, here's Manchego. Great. I know what Manchego is. With that, I might feature a special cheese, from Forever Cheese, like Garocha, or Alicia's, one of these cheeses that are unique. They're a little different. They're a little elevated, and the price is a little bit higher. Now you can then merchandise that with other products. You can merchandise it with crackers from Spain. You can merchandise it with conservas, tinned fish from Spain. Um, Suddenly, you're creating a theme. And if somebody wants to host their tapas dinner, or, however they want to feature it. And the same can be done. So we see a lot of the retailers will do special features throughout the year where it's really, it's essentially what they will call a passport.
Mm.
And you're traveling, you're inviting them, to have that adventure, without leaving home. So I think that's a great example of where the different departments can join together to, build off of each other.
And that's great that it's occasion based, like you're talking about, or theme based. I've seen a lot of retail locations do things around, the holidays and things like that, where I think that people are potentially more inclined to spend a little bit more on some of the specialty items. If you've got a lot of people coming over, you want to make a nice charcuterie board. Do you have recommendations for people who, or for retailers who want to drive that behavior year round, who are maybe trying to fight the idea that specialty cheese is just for when you have people over instead of, when you're having a snack or dinner at home by yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say the first thing is there are a lot of holidays. And so we do get sort of fixated. And the reality is, our company knows when we do our planning for the year, we know that the fourth quarter is going to be the busiest and the most lucrative season for us.
Hmm.
That's when people entertain. You do see a lift in specialty during that time. But in first quarter, you've got Valentine's Day. Going into the spring, you've got Easter, you've got Mother's Day, Father's Day, Fourth of July. There are a lot of holidays. And so if we're talking about those gatherings and taking advantage of, folks that want to be a little exploratory throughout the year, not just during, whatever major holidays they're doing at the end of the year, you can theme differently. I would say if you're looking for a spring theme, you're going to go with more fresh cheeses. What
Hmm.
can go with a salad? Maybe do some caramelized walnuts. Um, and that's the other thing, outside of the holidays themselves, find a season and feature that as the occasion. So, now we're pointing out, not just for gatherings, but again, if you're making your salad at home, it's spring. So let's do the Woolly Woolly, the sheep's milk cheese. Let's put a few dabs of that on there. Let's do a caramelized walnut. So it's, I think we get sort of pigeonholed into, here are the big gathering seasons, here are the times that everybody really wants to show off. But I think inviting people, that sort of idea of the self-care, the sort of treating yourself, like why not have that special item, in April, right?
Hmm.
Why not have your friends over for, to sip some, rosé and have a nice elevated snack. So it's giving people permission to go with the higher end product throughout the year.
And you've touched on this a little bit, but that really revolves around storytelling. You've talked a lot
Hmm.
about, the different, whether it's cultures or countries or occasions, and there's a storytelling component to that. And right now, a lot of retailers are stretched a little bit thin on the labor side. Do you have recommendations or effective strategies you've seen where a retailer can communicate that story on the shelf when there's not maybe a cheesemonger standing behind the counter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a huge trend that we've seen because traditionally Forever Cheese really is a business that was built on full wheels of cheese shipped to our customers, presented by a cheesemonger, right? And of course, with our retailers, there's always been a modified version of that. I would say now more than ever, even the grocery retailers, that have historically been really true to that cut and wrap, monger oriented selling, they are shifting maybe 5 stores to a lower labor model. And so we get these requests for pre-cut options. It's a really big shift in the industry. So then, yeah, as you said, the question is, how are you able to tell a story that is maybe a little more detailed, that is part of the value proposition of the product, and that justifies the price? So I think this is something that starts all the way back, all the way back in the supply chain. So this is something that we need to track across everybody that this touches because it's essentially a game of telephone. I can go to Italy and meet with Sergio Moro, who produces some of our booze-soaked cheeses, and the Sottocenere al Tartufo, which is coated in ash and has truffles. When Sergio presents me that cheese, I mean, obviously, it's one of the most amazing stories that you've ever heard. How it's made, why it's made. Um, by the time that gets to the shelf, how much of that is actually getting lost? So what
Hmm.
we've tried to do then is to look at all the steps in that process from Sergio to me, right? Then from me to, in many cases, a distributor. So I'm not even always able to talk directly to the retailer. So I have to tell the story of the distributor. But it is also important, that even though I may be selling directly to a distributor, I develop a relationship with that retailer. Then from that level, of course, depending on the size of the retailer, you may be dealing with a central office. So now how are you getting to that store level? And then again, even if you get to that store level, you may have somebody who's literally just stocking the shelf. But the reality is, even if they're just stocking the shelf, if you're able to transmit at least some degree of that information from what I said, about uh, Sergio telling me about Soda Cenere down to that person stocking the shelf, that a person walks up to them and says, I don't know, I'm trying to pick out a cheese. I don't know. Just give me something with truffles. You know, if you're able to transmit at least some of that story and passion to the store level, you suddenly have a champion in every single store. And so that's the challenge that we sort of come up against. And again, it's actually different for every single retailer. Every retailer that we work with has a different structure. Um, we have different levels of access to that store level. And so it's a training for us to be able to, maybe get bypass some of those barriers so that we can transmit that information all the way down. Because to some degree, you can do it with packaging, um, but then you have to target it with that education. You also have to target it with marketing. Marketing is a way to, reach consumers and bypass that whole system, right? But then you have to build that following. So
Hmm.
you're kind of targeting people in these different areas. The shelf is the most immediate, but and that's where you need that clarity and that recognition. But you're actually trying to catch people before they get there. And then ideally, you have that champion in the store who's going to close that deal for you. Because when that person goes up and there's two truffle cheeses, they're going to go with the Sergio Moro cheese because that's the one that they're passionate about.
You've talked about friction a lot in your
Hmm.
presentation and reducing friction around multiple stages. It sounds like what you just mentioned serves very well on the retail buyer side, on the producer side of it. What are some of the sources of friction for a buyer, a consumer coming into a retail location that you've experienced, and how can you reduce friction in that setting?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll go back to what I was talking about. The question that the consumer has in their mind as they walk up to the shelf is why? Why am I buying this? Why am I buying it now? Why this particular product? Why would I spend this much on this product? And that's the friction. That's what actually creates the resistance to make a decision. So for the consumer, you really just want to have an answer ready for them. And as I was saying before, in my presentation, I presented this as three pillars. You have the shopper's mind, which is the educational piece. You have the marketplace, which is catching them out in their everyday life. And then, of course, you have on the shelf. And, the retailer has the most control over the last one. But as the vendor, we are actually generating that, that understanding um, in advance of that decision making process. So we're actually reducing friction little by little. So when they actually walk up to the counter, the case, um, they already, number one, they have confidence in the product because again, through the education element, they understand what it is. They understand why a sheep's milk cheese might be better than a goat's milk cheese. Um, they have the recognition because, for example, our Mitica brand, um, people tend to know that more than Forever Cheese. And there's a good reason for that. We've really penetrated the market with that brand. So we create recognition. That's on the digital shelf, that's through social media marketing. So that's reducing friction. Oh, I know what that is, right? So that's another point of friction that we're reducing. Um, and then again, finally, that clarity. I look at the shelf, I see sheep's milk log, I see goat's milk log. I say, well, I've tried a goat's milk log, but I've never tried a sheep's milk log. So why am I buying it? I've never tried it before. It's a great price. It's actually better than the goat's milk log. Um, and you're answering that question for them. So you've set up the stage before they get to the counter, the case. And then when they're at the case, you just make it very easy for them to say yes.
Have you seen a specific brand or retailer do this really well? Can you walk us through an example of what success has looked like for some of the for some of the companies that are doing this a little bit differently?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I will give a couple examples. We have some great relationships on the West Coast and two of our great customers out there, one of which is Nugget Markets in Northern California. And then in Southern California, Bristol Farm. If you walk up to their cheese section, Nugget, for example, if you walk up to their cheese section, often there will be somebody there to
Hmm.
help walk you through. But if not, they are presenting those products in a way that is, it's just very intentional. It's very clear. It's very clear. Here are the Italian cheeses, but within the Italian cheeses, here is the elevated one. Here is the one that you might be able to buy every day. And you are able to make a decision on the spot. I understand what this is and where this lives. And on top of that, they're merchandising it against other similar products, a fig jam, a cracker. Um, you know, uh, we have rolled out with Bristol Farms our mostardas, which is an Italian condiment. People are not really familiar with this condiment, but because of the way that they merchandise and present the item, it's being really well adopted by the public. And again, it's because they're passionate about the story of it and because they put it in their stores in a way that it's very clear how or why you would buy that product.
Mm-hmm. You've already given us a lot of great information on the episode today, but what advice do you have for a retailer or department manager who wants to start elevating their shelf strategy next week? What's the first kind of small thing they can do to get started?
Sure. I think, the first thing that I would suggest for someone in that environment is to look at your display and imagine that you are a consumer who knows absolutely nothing about any of these products. And that's really hard to do. I think we struggle with it as, as the vendor, because we are the experts. It's very hard to get that distance. It's very hard to reimagine yourself as that sort of blank slate walking into the situation. So I would say taking that step back and saying, I don't know anything about this, right? I don't know what these products are or why I would buy them. So now you've gotten that distance, start building, stories. Start building stories within the way that the products are set up. These 5 items belong together. Why? You may have your own, justification. And it's that extra step beyond just saying, well, I just put these all together because they're all Goudas, right? No, now you need to say why this Gouda here, why that Gouda there, right? Why these chefs over here? And what are the other dry goods that I'm putting with those, and why did I put them there? I mean, you can put an Italian dry good next to a Spanish cheese, if they tell a story together, if you can put a Dutch cheese next to a Spanish conserva, it's taking that slight level of creativity to make it more engaging for the customer, because then they walk in and they ask that question, I would have never thought of that,
Mm-hmm.
It engages the customer, it raises the interest level, because it's very easy. You walk into a store, we all think very categorically, okay, there's all my, there's all my goat cheeses, there's all my this and that. It's much more interesting for the retailer to create that story in the actual merchandising itself. And will start the conversation that will engage the customer. And that gives you the opportunity to upsell. That gives you the opportunity to say, actually, there's something more going on here than I'm just buying some cheese.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your roadmap for bringing top shelf quality to every grocery shelf. Your insights on shifting away from price wars to building true value gives our listeners a fantastic playbook to take back to their stores. We greatly appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Don't forget, Fresh Take with IDDBA drops 2 episodes a month on the first and third Tuesdays. To ensure you don't miss our next episode, hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for tuning in to Fresh Take with IDDBA.